3 million pages of evidence, thousands of unsealed flight logs, millions of data points, names, themes, and timelines connected. You are listening to the Epstein Files, the world's first AI-native investigation into the case that traditional journalism simply could not handle.
Welcome back to the Epstein Files. Last time, we walked through the network inner circle and tested what the records could actually prove without speculation. Today, we are examining Les Wexner and mapping what the documents show about actors, timeline, decisions, and institutional response. As always, every document and source we reference is available at epsteinfiles.fm. So the first record is a 1991 limited power of attorney granting Epstein sweeping control over Wexner's financial and legal affairs.
And that document, it really is the starting point. It's the moment the relationship hardens into something legally binding. But to really understand that power of attorney, we have to go back a bit further.
Before Epstein.
Exactly, before Epstein. We need to look at who Les Wexner was in the years just before he signed that document. You have to understand the psychological context he was operating in because, well, people like Epstein don't just appear out of nowhere. They find a vacuum.
So we have a document from 1985. It's a New York Magazine article, The Bachelor Billionaire, on pins and needles. This is, 6 years before the power of attorney?
6 years. And Wexner is at the absolute peak of his powers. He's building this retail empire, The Limited, out of Columbus, Ohio. He's basically reinventing the American mall.
But he gives this quote in the article. It's unusually personal for a CEO profile. He talks about being driven by a dibbuk.
A dibbuk. And we need to be clear about what that means. In Jewish folklore, it's not just, a metaphor for being ambitious.
But it's not just I work hard.
No. A dibbuk is a restless spirit, a soul that's been dislocated and it latches onto a living person. It's consuming. It's this external force that's taken up residence inside you. And Wexner uses that specific word. He says, it's like a dibbuk. I'm driven.
That's a very specific choice of words to give to a journalist.
It is. And from a forensic perspective, it establishes a psychological baseline.
Yeah.
Here's a man who feels propelled by something he sees as separate from himself. He describes his own life in the article as very isolated.
He talks about spending weekends alone in his mansion.
Just moving furniture around, constantly redecorating, never satisfied. He says he feels like he's on pins and needles. It's a description of a void, a deep, profound emptiness that billions of dollars in a retail empire clearly aren't filling.
And a void is what manipulators look for.
It's exactly what they look for. You're not looking for the happy, well-adjusted person. You're looking for the person with the dibbuk, the one who has everything but feels like they have nothing. That's your target. And Wexner had built this fortress of solitude for himself in Ohio. That's the environment Epstein walks into.
So Epstein wasn't just bringing financial advice.
He was bringing a solution. A cure for the isolation, for the boredom, a connection to a world outside Columbus.
But the records show it wasn't just a quiet, isolated life. There's another element. We have the Shapiro Verter file complete from the Columbus Police Department. It's dated 1991, but the events it describes are from 1985, the same year as that magazine profile.
This is a critical piece of context. Arthur Shapiro, he was a prominent lawyer in Columbus, handled very high-end corporate structuring, tax shelters for the local elite. In 1985, he was murdered.
How?
2 bullets to the head, close range. It was a professional execution, and the case is still officially unsolved.
And Les Wexner's name is in this police file.
It is. Now, we have to be extremely precise here. The file does not accuse Wexner of any crime. He was never charged. It does not prove he was involved.
So what does it prove?
It proves that the police investigation into this execution mapped out Shapiro's business dealings. And Shapiro was, he was terrified before he was killed. The file notes, he told people he was afraid he was going to be killed because of a grand jury investigation into some tax shelters he was managing.
He was scheduled to testify, wasn't he?
The very next day. And Wexner's name appears in the file in the context of those business dealings, those tax shelters. So the forensic relevance here is about context. The common narrative is that Epstein was this slick New York operator who just dazzled a naive Midwestern retailer.
That narrative falls apart if that same retailer was already operating in an environment that included murdered lawyers in federal grand jury investigations.
Exactly. Epstein didn't walk into a simple, clean world. He walked into a very complex, very high-stakes operation that was already dealing with legal gray areas and, violent outcomes. Wexner was not naive. So when he handed that power of attorney to Epstein, it wasn't the act of a man who didn't understand risk. It was a calculated decision.
Okay, let's look at the mechanism of that decision. The
Okay.
1991 power of attorney. This is from Epstein Case Documents Folder 4. This isn't what people think of when they hear power of attorney, is it? It's not for, medical decisions.
Not at all. And it's not a standard investment advisor agreement either. I've looked at hundreds of those for high net worth clients. Normally, they grant discretion over specific trades, buy this stock, sell this bond, move money between these pre-approved accounts. This is something else entirely.
What does it authorize?
The language is sweeping control. It gives Epstein the authority to hire and fire Wexner's personal and corporate staff.
So he could fire his assistant, his security chief.
Yes. It also allows him to sign checks from any of Wexner's accounts, to buy and sell assets.
What kind of assets?
Any kind. Houses, cars, planes, companies. But the most significant clause, the one that really matters, is the power to bind Wexner legally in contracts.
Bind him legally. Break that down for us.
It means that if Jeffrey Epstein signs a contract, from a legal standpoint, it's as if Les Wexner signed it himself. If Epstein walks into a bank and takes out a $500 million loan in Wexner's name, that's Wexner's debt. If Epstein signs a deal to buy a hotel, Wexner owns a hotel. It's a complete transfer of legal personhood.
And the date on this is 1991. What was Jeffrey Epstein's resume in 1991?
It was thin. He was a college dropout. He'd been a math teacher at the Dalton School. He had a brief and somewhat controversial run at Bear Stearns that ended abruptly. He had no major firm behind him, no compliance department, no track record of managing a multi-billion-dollar fortune.
He was essentially a private operator, a nobody in the world of institutional finance.
And yet, a self-made billionaire hands him this document. From a forensic auditing standpoint, this is a 5-alarm fire. You don't grant this kind of plenary power to an outsider with that resume. It just doesn't happen.
Unless there's a reason. A utility.
Right. You might do this if you want to create distance from your own financial activities. It creates a layer of deniability. I didn't authorize that transaction. My manager with power of attorney did. But even then, you'd have safeguards, veto power. This document seems to surrender the veto.
And the documents don't give us a reason. We see the what, but the record is silent on the why.
Correct. We don't have documentation for why a billionaire would sign this over to a former math teacher. That reason is missing from the paper trail.
Right.
But we can track the results of that power.
So we move from the legal instrument to the physical assets, the mansion, 9071st Street in New York.
Right. The Herbert Strauss Mansion, one of the largest private residences in Manhattan. The documents on this are EF 00003757 and EFTA 000730069. And the chain of title in these property records, it tells the story.
Wexner buys it first.
Yeah.
In 1989.
Yes, he buys it himself. It's a trophy property. Then the records show he sinks an enormous amount of money into renovating it. The document, EFTA 0003757, specifically mentions the remodeling he funded.
And we're not talking about just a new kitchen.
No. This was a complete gut renovation. Things like heated sidewalks so snow would melt instantly, reinforced security doors. The entire interior was rebuilt. He poured tens of millions into this building. He was creating a palace for himself.
And after all that, he transfers the title.
The deed moves from Les Wexner to an entity that is controlled by Jeffrey Epstein.
And what was the recorded sale price for this transfer?
$0, or a nominal sum, like $10 just for the legal paperwork. The market value at the time was estimated to be around $46 million. It's often cited as the largest residential transfer in New York City history with no money changing hands.
Let's break down the financial reality of that. Because from an auditor's perspective, 0 is a very loud number.
It's a huge red flag, because if this house was a payment for services, Jeffrey, you're my money manager, here's a house, then that's $46 million of taxable income for Epstein.
Which would mean a tax bill of, what, $25 million?
Something in that range, yes. A bill he would have had to pay immediately in cash. We don't have his tax returns, but there's no indication he had that kind of liquid cash to pay the tax on a house he got for free.
Okay, so if it wasn't income, was it a gift?
Well, if it was a gift, then the donor pays the tax. Wexner would have had to write a multi-million-dollar check to the U.S. Treasury for the privilege of giving away his $46 million mansion.
Which makes absolutely no business sense.
None whatsoever. Billionaires don't become billionaires by paying millions in taxes to give away their most valuable assets.
Right.
So this transfer wasn't a standard sale, it wasn't standard compensation, and it wasn't a standard gift. It looks more like a capital transfer. Or like parking an asset.
Parking it, as in holding it for someone else.
Potentially. If I transfer a deed to you, but I still effectively control you through other means, like a power of attorney, then the asset is just being held. But on paper, on the public record, $46 million of wealth moved from Wexner's name into Epstein's, and that transfer gave Epstein the physical infrastructure he needed.
It gave him the stage, the fortress in Manhattan.
Wexner bought the theater, paid to have it completely rebuilt, and then handed the keys to Epstein. This moves the relationship beyond employer-employee. You don't give your employee your mansion and your power of attorney. This suggests Epstein had something of value. He had leverage.
You don't pay $46 million for stock tips.
You pay that kind of price when you're buying something equally valuable. Silence, maybe. Protection.
Oh.
Or paying a debt that can't be recorded on the books.
So we've seen the transfer of legal power with the POA and the transfer of wealth with the mansion. Now there's the transfer of human capital, the access to the company.
Right. Victoria's Secret. We're looking now at reporting from Business Insider and specifically at the Maria Farmer affidavit. That's in the 1324 Epstein documents file. This is sworn testimony.
And it moves us from a financial audit to an operational one?
Yes. Maria Farmer was a young artist in New York in the early 90s. She testifies that she was approached by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And the lure, the hook they used, it wasn't come work for some financier you've never heard of.
It was come work for Victoria's Secret.
Exactly. The affidavit is clear. She was told she'd be working for the brand, which was the crown jewel of Wexner's L. Brad's company. And based on that promise, she describes being taken to Ohio.
To New Albany, the town Wexner essentially built from the ground up.
To a guest house on Wexner's own sprawling private estate. She describes the layout, the security. This wasn't some offsite office. She was inside the perimeter.
Which implies Epstein had the operational authority to be there and to bring guests.
It implies he could represent the brand to potential recruits. And the company did nothing to stop him. This is what we'd call an accountability gap. L Brands was a major publicly traded corporation. It had an HR department, legal counsel, standard recruitment protocols.
You can't just have a random person claiming to hire models for your company.
Of course not. The liability is enormous. But we have no document in the public record, no internal L Brands memo that authorizes Jeffrey Epstein to act as a scout or recruiter for Victoria's Secret. And yet, there are multiple accounts of him doing exactly that.
And he wasn't hiding it.
No, he was sitting in on casting sessions, reviewing photos for the catalog. He was operating as if he were part of the company's management. And you can't do that without access. You can't just drive onto the Wexner estate. You need clearance. The gates have to open for you. The security team has to be told you belong there.
So the fact that he could bring Maria Farmer there suggests that the instruction to allow him that access came from the very top.
It had to. It's a complete bypass of normal corporate governance. Any other person doing that would have been met with a cease and desist letter from the company's lawyers instantly. But here, it went on for years. That implies it was sanctioned, or that the person doing it held the power of attorney for the man who owned the company.
So POA, mansion, corporate access, this brings us to the breakup, or the official story of the breakup. This is where the timeline gets complicated.
It's where the official narrative runs into direct conflict with the documentary evidence. So the claim, which Wexner made in letters like the Wexner letter to Judge Preska in 2020, is that he severed all ties with Epstein in 2007 or 2008.
Right around the time of the first Florida investigation, the claim is a clean break. I found out he was engaged in illegal activity and I cut him off completely.
That is the claim. So we test that against the Jeffrey Epstein records DOJ full data sets. This is material seized by the government, email logs, schedules. We find a document, EFTA 024229998.pdf. The date is September 8, 2010.
So 2 to 3 years after the supposed clean break.
Yes. And the subject line is simply Les Wexner email. It's an administrative email, but it shows the communication channel between their offices is still active. Then there's another one, EFTA 023159901.pdf. This one is dated September 5, 2012.
5 years after the break.
And the email is an internal request in Epstein's circle asking, do you have the main mailing address for Les Wexner?
You don't need the mailing address of someone you severed all ties with 5 years ago.
It suggests an intent to send him something, a document, a package. It implies an ongoing relationship, even if it's just administrative. And then there's EFTA 0255250.pdf.
And this one is more direct.
It mentions a meeting. The text says, Lars recently met with Les Wexner at Les's request. And this document is in Epstein's files, which suggests Epstein is being kept in the loop about Wexner's activities.
So the claim of a complete separation in 2007 is, at best, an oversimplification.
It's a documented discrepancy. The relationship may have changed form, but the data shows the channels of communication were not dead. Information was still flowing between the two camps well into the 2010s.
Which brings us to the money. The final piece of the breakup story. Wexner's 2019 statement about misappropriation.
Yes, this comes from the Wexner Foundation report. In 2019, after Epstein's final arrest, when the world's attention is on this, Wexner issues a statement. He alleges that back in 2007, he discovered Epstein had misappropriated vast sums of his money.
The figure usually cited is $46 million, the same number as the mansion's estimated value.
An interesting coincidence. But misappropriated is a very gentle word for what he's describing. He's describing theft.
So from an auditor standpoint, if your client discovers their advisor has stolen $46 million, what's step one?
Step one is you call the police, you file a criminal complaint, you sue for the recovery of the funds, you create a legal paper trail immediately.
Let's go back to the context of 2008. The Palm Beach police chief, Michael Ryder, was desperately trying to build a stronger case against Epstein. He was pushing the state attorney hard.
He was looking for any felony he could find to get more leverage, to get around the lenient non-prosecution agreement that was being negotiated with the federal prosecutor, Acosta.
So if Les Wexner, a prominent billionaire, had walked into the Palm Beach Police Department in 2008 and said, "This man stole $46 million from me,"
it would have been a nuclear bomb. That's first-degree grand larceny. It's a charge that would have carried a sentence of up to 30 years. It would have completely changed the negotiations. The federal plea deal didn't cover a massive financial theft in Ohio.
It would have given prosecutors immense leverage.
They could have put him away for decades on that alone. So the question is, did Wexner file a police report?
And the answer from the record.
We have no documentation of any criminal complaint filed by Les Wexner against Jeffrey Epstein for theft in 2007, 2008, or any time before 2019. We have silence.
The decision was made not to report a $46 million theft.
Think about that institutional decision. You only choose to absorb a loss of that magnitude if the cost of trying to recover it is even higher.
And what could be more costly than $46 million?
A public court case. If Wexner sues Epstein, that leads to discovery. It leads to depositions under oath. And in that deposition, Epstein would have been asked to explain the $46 million.
And he could have said, "I didn't steal it. It was payment. It was authorized. Look at the power of attorney he gave me. Look at the mansion he gave me."
He would have opened up their entire financial history in a public courtroom. Wexner made a calculation. He chose to lose the money rather than face Epstein in court in 2008. That decision to protect their privacy, their shared history, was worth more than $46 million. That's leverage.
Which leads to the question that hangs over all of this, the intelligence angle. We see speculation about it in various sources, the idea that this was more than just a billionaire and his advisor.
Right. And here we have to be incredibly disciplined and stick only to the public record. There are strong claims that this entire structure, Wexner's money, Epstein's network, was a front for an intelligence operation, specifically for Israeli intelligence, Mossad.
We have documented connections. Epstein invested in Israeli tech firms like Carbine, which involved former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak.
And Ehud Barak is a confirmed visitor on the flight logs and in Epstein's schedules. He admits to the relationship. The theory is that Wexner's fortune was the deep pocket that allowed Epstein to make these strategic investments and cultivate these relationships on behalf of a foreign state.
But what does the documentary record actually prove? Is there a FARA filing?
No. We've checked the Foreign Agents Registration Act database. There is no filing listing either Jeffrey Epstein or Les Wexner as an agent of a foreign government. There are no declassified intelligence cables in the public domain that confirm this command structure.
So based on the available public documents, we have to classify it as unproven.
It is unproven in the court records. What we can say is that the financial patterns are anomalous. The structure, one man with no other known clients being funded to the tune of hundreds of millions by a single benefactor, with that money then flowing into politically sensitive areas, it mirrors the structure of an intelligence front. But we don't have the internal memo that proves it. We can map the flow of money, but we don't have documentation for the orders.
Okay, let's synthesize the 6 evidence blocks we walked through.
Block 1, the context. A psychologically driven billionaire, the Dybbuk, already operating in a high-stakes environment before Epstein even arrives. Block 2, the power of attorney. A total, legally binding transfer of agency in 1991.
Block 3, the mansion transfer. A $46 million wealth transfer with no logical business or tax explanation.
Block 4, the corporate access. Epstein using Victoria's Secret as a recruitment tool, a massive liability that the corporation seemingly ignored.
Block 5, the timeline contradictions. Email evidence showing communication continued years after the alleged 2007 breakup.
And Block 6, the silence on the theft. The institutional decision not to file a criminal complaint in 2008 for a $46 million loss, which protected Epstein at his moment of greatest vulnerability.
When you lay it out, the paradox is clear. Wexner is the source of all the money and the power. He's the billionaire. Epstein is, on paper, the employee. But the documents show Wexner consistently acting as the subordinate.
The hierarchy is inverted. The billionaire gives away his control, his house, and then stays silent about a massive theft. The 1991 Power of Attorney is the document that formalizes that inversion. It suggests that from very early on, Epstein held the leverage.
And the institutional response from L. Brands from the Foundation was to contain this, to manage it privately, until 2019 when it became impossible.
Even then, the response was a carefully worded letter, not a sworn deposition under oath. We still have not seen Les Wexner have to answer detailed questions about that power of attorney or that mansion transfer in a courtroom.
The documents proved that this wasn't a story of a simple con man. This was a decades-long, deeply integrated relationship.
It was symbiotic, and the records answer the question of where Epstein's money came from. It came from Les Wexner. The money, the house, the access, the legal power, it was all provided. That is what the documents prove. The one question the documents cannot definitively answer is why.
Back in that 1985 article, Wexner said he was always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
And in a way, it did. He built one of the great American retail empires. But his legacy now, it's permanently fused to Jeffrey Epstein's. That power of attorney was a surrender, and its consequences have now defined him.
We've mapped the architecture of the money and the power.
Next time, we map the movement.
Next time, the flight logs.
You have just heard an analysis of the official record. Every claim, name, and date mentioned in this episode is backed by primary source documents. You can view the original files for yourself at epsteinfiles.fm. If you value this data-first approach to journalism, please leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. It helps keep this investigation visible. We'll see you in the next file.